Hello there. My name's Mike Hamer, and I've been a model railroader for the past 30 years. I model the Boston and Maine and the Maine Central Railroads from my home here in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. I got into the hobby back in 1992 when my grade 4-5 classroom where I was teaching decided to commemorate Canada's 125th birthday. So we decided to build a model railroad in the classroom. Well, I learned at the same time as the students, and I was hooked on the hobby. Later, I wanted to build a model railroad in my own home, but I felt I wasn't ready. So I honed my skills by practicing building kits and a few little dioramas to hone my scenery skills. And then by 1997, I felt it time to plan and build the layout. Trevor Marshall and Marty Phillips lent a hand, good friends of mine. The layout was completely built and scenic in one calendar year. And I know you won't believe me because everyone says a model railroad is never finished, but mine was. So I invite you to hop aboard a Maine Central or a Boston and Maine passenger train and come join me in the layout room. If you're an admirer of the beautiful maroon and gold paint scheme of the Boston and Maine, inspired by the EMD livery with the pinstriping, well, the duck under entrance to the room is the place to be as we catch a trio of Jeeps passing by. Uh, this area serves as both the northern terminal and the southern terminal of the railroad. In the north, it's Rigby Yard in Portland, and in the south, it's the classification yard at Lowell Junction just outside of Boston. Note the Digitrax interface below on the wall. I've run Digitrax here for 20 years and have never had a problem. It's just run flawlessly for me. And those F units with the pinstriping, the Maine Central has green units with the yellow or gold pinstriping, and that's quite handsome. But they also are the brother railroad to the Boston and Maine, so they do also have some maroon units as well. This train has some 40 cars in HO scale running in it, which if you imagineer that to be, it could easily be 100 to 120 cars in real life with a bit of an imagination, so to speak. And that's what's great about this hobby. We're confined to our restrictions of our room size, but you find creative solutions and you find ways to bring the railroading you want to your model railroad, depending on whatever size of room you have. And with the buggy passing by, we say farewell to that train. We begin our tour of the model railroad as train M5 makes its way into the city of North Dover. North Dover is situated in a river valley. You see the strong urban presence with those buildings angled. And then we reach the industrial area, and it's those large industries that help support the railroad with the traffic necessary to make the railroad viable. The train is now going to cut across Boundary Road on the outskirts of town, and then it's going to step up onto the Salmon River Bridge, Stanley Bridge, and it leaves New Hampshire and enters the state of Maine. It reaches the junction with the Maine Central, the secondary railroad. This is the Boston and Maine, and there's the interlocking tower that guards the junction. Through a view block where the highway overpass is, and then the train enters Marshall Cut. Normally I'd be blowing the horn at some of these locations, but with COVID restrictions, I didn't want anybody else in a small room with me, so I'm doing all the filming myself, thus the train's running on its own. The train exits the outbound end of Marshall Cut, and we cross the large deck girder bridge at the New England River, and it's the New England River Bridge at Haney Gorge. The train now enters a rock cut where it goes into staging, and that's one of the portals to staging. And if I swing around a little more, we've done a full circle, 360 degrees. So let's segue back and follow the end of that train as it leaves the scenic portion of the layout and enters staging. And with the buggy on its way out, that's a Boston and Maine caboose is a buggy, we say farewell. This is the schematic drawing I drew for Model Railroad magazine when they published a few of my articles. My bedroom layout is in an 11 by 13 spare room in my basement. You have to duck in under to get into the layout room, and there are 4 access areas I can duck up into in case I have to observe the trains for any reason. I rarely, if ever, have to do that. The scenic portion of the layout is the colorful area that you see, and the staging area that stages the trains that come in and do their dance on the scenic portion is the brown area that you see. I have Boston and Maine tracks that are very long, and I have Maine Central staging tracks that are shorter because it's the inferior railroad. The Boston and Maine is the superior railroad. I wanted a strong urban element, segueing into an industrial area which supports a lot of the traffic for the railroad, then into the outskirts of town. We leave the state of New Hampshire, crossing the Salmon River, we enter the state of Maine. Here's the junction with my other railroad, the Maine Central. We go through this view block, and then we come through Marshall Cut, take the New England River Bridge to another cut, and then the train goes back into staging. There are 3 portals that act as entrances and exits from staging to scenic areas. And here's one in the main city of North Dover, and it's a tunnel, and it's disguised with this building and this stand of trees. This portal of the Boston and Maine is disguised as well. You don't see the hole in the backdrop, as there's a rock cut with a series of trees that help mask it. And then the Maine Central comes in here in a highway overpass, and the interlocking tower at the junction help to hide that entrance to staging. All in all, it's a fun layout to operate, a lot of action packed into one room. We're at the outbound end of town, and we have a Maine Central train coming around the big curve between the 2 passing sidings, the south siding and the north siding, which are both filled with quite a great deal of traffic on this day. When the trains aren't coming through, the local North Dover switcher can use all 3 tracks as a major classification yard. Note the red brick building in the background. That's the Holy Spirit's Distilleries, a play on words as I'm a Catholic school teacher. The fire escape I built from scratch, and it took me over 40 hours. And wouldn't you know it, as soon as I finished building it, I saw an ad for them in Model Railroad magazine for brass fire escapes. Go figure. But I'm proud of mine just the same. Much later in the day, a new rail fan has captured the train as it's crossing the Salmon River. It's heading home. Being the Maine Central train, it's now entering the state of Maine after crossing the Salmon River. That's the Legion Hall in the foreground with the clipper vessel, and the F.B. Hamer and Sons building in the background is named after my father, Frederick Bryan Hamer. There's a lot of activity around the Salmon River, and when I used to go camping, I camped in that very spot. This area of my layout was made famous when it appeared on the cover of Model Railroader's Great Model Railroads 2004. That was like Christmas in July when it came out. That diesel, the 1519, is an RS3, custom painted and detailed by Ottawa's very own Charles Gendron. He's a master detailer and painter. This is a mixed freight, and on the tail end is the McEwen car I received at Ovar in 2002, and what an honor that was to be given that car by the Ottawa Valley Associated Railroaders. On the other bank of the river, we've got some sunbathers and just drying off as the train runs atop the bridge at Haney Gorge. It's the New England River Bridge. And the slow order continues from the bridge right into Marshall Cut, as we're on the north end, or the outbound end of Marshall Cut. It's a short train, nonetheless, it's a beauty in my books. And as the passenger car enters the cut, we say farewell from this afternoon. Here is the train schedule I've set up for my operations, and it's just a portion of the schedule. I could not possibly run the 55 trains a day that went through Dover, New Hampshire, so I run about maybe 15 to 20 in an operating session through my fictitious town of North Dover. Here's the time that the train would arrive town. Here's the train number, whether it's a Boston and Maine or a Maine Central or a St. Clair and Northern. And this is a description of the train, the title of the train. Is the train inbound to Boston, or is its destination outbound from Boston? And then there's some further information for the operators. And as I say, it's fun to reproduce in about a 3-hour train operating session a portion of a typical day in the town of North Dover. Train N2, the newsboy, is just blowing the cut at Marshall Cut. It'll be exiting the south end of the big opening, and we have a trio of Jeeps on the head end, 2 B&M and 1 Maine Central. It's full power on this train. Those 50-foot and 40-foot boxcars are all carrying newsprint down to Boston, thus the name Train N2, the newsboy, followed by some general manifest freight. Those 3 tank cars are going to be dropped off in North Dover, and then the Maine Central train will pick them up to take back into the interior of Maine to fuel the paper mills. The switch engine you see down below, to your left, is the Boston and Maine dedicated switch engine for the Conley Lumber and Coal facility. It operates the yard there. There's only a single track on the model, but the idea is that it'd be 3 or 4 tracks in there, and that will have a dedicated run down to North Dover as well. The Doobie Brothers wrote Long Train Running, and that sure was one long train run at about 45 cars, I believe. Makes it feel like it's a 120-car train. I know the hour is 12 noon, lunchtime, as both crews aboard those 44-tonners have gone to the local restaurant in the lower section of town near the station, while one of the other crews has already had a bite to eat, and they're now setting out some of the tank cars onto the south side to be picked up by the oil can, the Maine Central train. These cars came in on an earlier N2, Boston and Maine manifest freight. I'll get in there and I'll uncouple. Et voila. And then the crew goes off to conduct other business elsewhere in town, some of the sidings. The Phillips Furniture Factory is an imposing structure, and we catch the St. Clair and Northern off on track 21. It's just offloaded a boxcar, and it's going to pick up some furniture in a loaded boxcar. You see the tank cars on the closer siding. They'll be picked up by the Maine Central train. But first we have a short local coming in. It was out near Boundary Road, switching out a couple of industries at that end of town, and it'll be just passing through. And that crew will probably go to lunch shortly. Here we are at the interlocking tower that guards the junction of the Boston and Maine in Maine Central. A Maine Central train is scheduled to arrive shortly. It's the oil can coming in from northern Maine, and here he is now. He has to hold the junction. He must stop and wait for the oncoming Boston and Maine train from the same direction. And the Boston and Maine train has priority. Even though it's a smaller, shorter train, it is the superior train as we're on Boston and Maine rails. Once the B&M clears the diamond area and clears the junction, the tower operator will get the switch and give the Maine Central clearance into town on a short order and keep a visual on the tail end of the Boston and Maine train. So the switch has been thrown, and he now is able to leave on his own accord, and he's now got clearance onto B&M rails. And as he heads into town, he's not going fast at all because he's keeping a safe distance behind the train that just passed him. There's nothing more beautiful than seeing a unit train of tank cars, hopper cars, bulkhead flats, you name it. A train with all the same type of rail cars is a beauty to behold. There's the caboose passing now. They'll clear the junction, and then the tower operator will throw the switch back to Boston and Maine trackage, the Superior Railroad. It's about 7 o'clock in the evening, and we catch the Boston and Maine Extra 1170. This is a local hop. We've assembled our family by the gazebo by the American flag there. Every evening after swimming or fishing, all day camping, we head out for an ice cream, and we await the arrival of that 7:15 train, and it arrives like clockwork. It's followed very shortly by the Maine Central oil tanker train, the oil can, as that train had held the junction a couple of miles up the way, awaiting clearance into North Dover. So he's on a slow order restriction because he's following the Boston and Maine train. These are the tank cars that have come back from northern Maine where they fueled the paper mills. They're empty. They'll be loaded again, and they'll head back up to Maine the next day. And we really enjoy the serenity of the water, the canoeists. You've got the swans there. It's just a lovely, lovely evening as we say goodbye to the Maine Central crew. With those 3 tank cars set out on the south siding by the Boston and Maine switch crew, the Maine Central oil can comes into town. He'll be lifting these cars. We'll just come up to the station. Here's the green and gold of the Maine Central. With the cut made in a specified location on the train, the oil can proceeds to back up into the south siding and lift those cars. 2 car lengths, 1 car length on the pin. Good to pull out. And we've got the 3 cars on the locomotive. Brakeman Mike will get the turnout once we've cleared. Clear the back, 4 cars to the hitch. Two cars, 1 car on the pin. With clearance, we're good to head out onto Maine Central trackage. And there's the route of the oil can for another day in North Dover. Quite a varied amount of tank cars. Let's put things in a geographical perspective. We're in New England, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, state of Maine, Canada up to the north. Here's the Atlantic Ocean. I model the western route of the Boston and Maine, and the reason it's called the western route is there's an easterly route that plies the coastline, a much slower local route, if you will. There's actually another route further to the west, not called the western route. It's the Connecticut River line or the Conn River line, and it's a wonderful portion of the Boston and Maine, very scenic as well. Here's my B&M trackage. Here's my Maine Central trackage and my St. Clair and Northern trackage. Dover, New Hampshire is the town that saw the 55 trains a day, so I model my fictitious town in North Dover. Manifest freights are outbound from Boston or inbound to Boston from Portland. I have some locals that ply the main line and switch out these towns, and another local up here. They're both turns. I have 2 Maine Central trains and the 1 St. Clair and Northern. That's not to mention all the hard work and diligent effort that the North Dover town switcher crew goes through all the time in setting out cars, blocking traffic for trains, and switching out all the different industries. It's a whole ton of fun modeling the Boston and Maine and the Maine Central. While most passenger trains are named trains, this is just a short local coming into North Dover from up Community Way in the state of Maine. And it's going to blow the crossing. This is Boundary Road. There's the F.B. Hamer and Son structure I mentioned earlier. It produces twin strollers for baby carriages, seeing as I'm a twin. That's what my father got into. At least that's what I say for the railroad. And Boundary Road is quite a busy location, as you have the Legion Hall and the school and a gas station there as well. Note the train lighting equipment box at the long hood end of the diesel locomotive. This houses the lighting equipment for the passenger trains. So this engine, this GP7, can run freight and passenger service. All aboard! And our train departs North Dover. And again, the whole town of North Dover is built within a valley. The buildings rise up on both sides of the valley, and the station is in the basin. And we bid farewell to the train. We're at the duck under entrance to the room. You see the staging tracks going off to the left. We've got some passenger trains and freight trains staged in both directions. And if I look up above here, I can see the main layout room off in the distance. And over under those buildings, way over in town, is the locomotive for the train that you see below me here. There's the caboose. That's the train that's about 40-45 cars long. There's the portal to staging for the Maine Central and behind the interlocking tower. And off in the distance, you can see the two Maine Central tracks with trains in inbound and outbound directions both. And here we have the engines with their headlights off, just to show you the little staging yard here for B&M locals. And if I have one locomotive here, I can use it as a two-track switching yard. So, and if I look over here, you can see the whole layout there as well. You got the surround staging and the layout. Here I am in staging, and we're going to have that Boston and Maine passenger train come on by and run by us. It left the station in North Dover, and it's running along the Boston and Maine rails and staging. Past the tower. There it goes. I can have it tour the layout, or I can bring it to a stop, but I'll let it rumble on a bit more, just so you get to see it leave and you get an idea of the staging. Let's follow the train out of the yard. There's that beautiful F2, 4255, followed by the B unit of the FT 4217, and there's the A unit. This train has departed Lowell Junction to the south. It'll run through the entire layout, drop traffic in North Dover, head into the state of Maine, enter staging, and arrive back at the very same spot, but now it's arriving in Portland, Maine, rather than Lowell, Massachusetts. We're rail fanning the Boundary Road crossing, and we do have our Boston and Maine outbound freight approaching the crossing. It's got its horn on. It has to keep that horn on until it's clear. And now it's clear of the road, and we just blow the bridge there momentarily. And you can see the schoolhouse where I taught in the background, and then behind those trees are the two staging tracks for the Boston and Maine. Note the shanty for the crossing guard. We don't have any wigwams, or we don't have any flashing lights, but a gentleman would come out and flag the crossing. He must be asleep because he's not out on the road today, but that's okay. This train is on its way to Portland, Maine, and it had been in Mechanicville in the morning in New York. It bypassed Boston where it picked up some equipment, and it would have stopped in North Dover to pick up some lading as well. From a rail fan's perspective, this next sequence is considered a going away shot, as our Boston and Maine train is heading away from the rail fan. It's crossed the junction with the Maine Central, and you see a Maine Central work crew up ahead under the bridge there, and there's a highway overpass, and the train is blowing Marshall Cut off in the distance, and it would also be blowing the New England River Bridge as well. And that interlocking tower is one of the first kits I ever built, a Craftsman kit out of plaster. Here we are at the Lumber and Coal facility belonging to Stan Conley. It's the Conley Lumber and Coal, and we've got our train passing through Marshall Cut in behind, and there's Mitchell Creek in the background as well. Conley Lumber and Coal is a facility about 10 miles out of town, and it requires its own train crew to switch out the operations. And a train originates in North Dover and brings up some of the loaded coal and brings back empty coal cars and loaded cars with lumber. By now you must be wondering if there's any paperwork for the crews on these trains, and indeed there is. For our switch crew stationed in North Dover, they may have to spot cars into the industries that have been dropped off by trains. So here's the car number and its identification marks, and here's the industry that it goes to. They may have to lift a car to go out on another train, or even transfer cars from one industry to another in town. Or they may be asked to block traffic or assemble traffic for another train departing town or coming into town and then heading out of town. And here they check the destination of the car, so they put it in the train and they block it in the order that train will reach those destinations. Here we have train orders for a train for when it arrives North Dover. This one's told to hold the interlocking for clearance onto B&M trackage, because this is a Maine Central train, the inferior railroad. When it arrives North Dover, it's going to drop these 3 tank cars, and it's going to lift these 3 tank cars that have been set out by the North Dover crew. It doesn't always have to be 3 and 3. It could be drop 4, lift 2. And then you're going to meet a Boston and Maine train. So there's even more paperwork, but I won't go into detail with that right now. But this is all you need to know for the movement of the trains. Hovering high above Conley Lumber and Coal, we have a BL2 leading this local train. They're termed the Ugly Ducklings for their appearance, but I rather like them. This short local has come from north of the New England River Bridge, and it's going to deposit some cars in North Dover and then head on its way down to Lowell Junction. And we have that long cupola caboose of the St. Clair and Northern on the tail end. Lovely. We catch our BL2 locomotive at milepost 30, about to tiptoe onto the Stanley Bridge at the Salmon River. Check out the reflection in the water. It's simply gorgeous. What a marvelous day in New England. The train is on a slow order again as it's entering the yard throat at North Dover. And we've got a colorful consist of cars there. Lovely. And that St. Clair and Northern buggy pulls up the rear. That's a long cupola caboose. Early the following morning, we're in the lower end of North Dover, down by the station in the freight house. And we've got the ore train coming through with a brethren of bluebirds on the head end. That's 1746 and 1701 in the McGinnis paint scheme with the interlaced B over M. Patrick McGinnis was the president, and his wife helped him design the new logo and the new look. She did the same at the New Haven when he was president there, the interlaced N over H. We have those coal cars. Typically, this train would stop in North Dover and drop off a car or two of coal for the Conley Lumber and Coal facility. But on this day, just for the sake of videoing, we'll run it through. And here you see the McGinnis buggy on the tail end in the beautiful blue with the black striping. That wasn't a unit train. There were some boxcars on the head end, and there were some covered hoppers before the caboose. We have our Boston and Maine ore train just hitting the outbound end of town between the north and south siding. Soon it will reach Boundary Road, and then it'll be crossing the Salmon River. The train is still in the state of New Hampshire. Now we get the head end crossing that curved stone arch bridge, and we're in the state of Maine now. It's not a true unit train, as I mentioned earlier, because we have boxcars on the head end and we have some covered hoppers on the tail end. But the railroad is sure earning its keep on this day, hauling that coal outbound from Boston. A beautiful sight. And now the tail end exits New Hampshire and the full train is in Maine. We're looking at the south bank, or the inbound bank, of the New England River, and here's the New England River Bridge at Haney Gorge. There's a high green signal for our train, and it'll be exiting Marshall Cut. And here we go. We're crossing the deck girder bridge now. Those bluebirds on the point are beautiful locomotives, and the boxcars match them nicely. It's like they're getting dressed up to go to the ball, or to deliver ore. I don't know if I'd want to get dressed up to deliver coal, mind you, but that's a story for another day. And The scenery in this area of the layout is only about 14 inches deep, but I've managed to squeeze in the large chasm, and it's most effective in my books, and I love that buggy on the tail end again. And with that, we say goodbye. At milepost 42, we catch up with the milk run. A little end cab is hauling it, the 1223 today, and we have dairy products from H.B. Hood and Sons, and those billboard milk cars are quite beautiful. Sheffield Farms, Whiting Milk Company, Borden's with some more billboard milk cars. We have a variety of scenes on those cars, and a scratch-built caboose tails up the rear. We're at the outbound end of the yard in North Dover, just behind the gas station. That's Haney Fuels off in the distance. It shares the same spur as the Holy Spirit's Distillery. Our milk run is just entering North Dover, where it'll probably drop off a couple of cars. Sometimes they pick up a car. And down in the bottom right-hand corner, you see an old boxcar used as a maintenance of way shed. So the railroad always wants to find a way to save money, and that's one way to do it. Boundary Road is a high traffic area for the roadway as well as for the railroad. And here we've got our local entering really slow, blowing the crossing. That RS2 1503 is a true beauty in my books with those silver trucks. Got the bell on as he enters the yard. Santa Fe reefer. A nice gondola. Covered hopper of the Nickel Plate Road, and then our old style caboose, the buggy, bringing up the rear. By now, I guess you've noticed that smart car down in the parking lot near the station. That's a joke. My daughters really wanted one a long time ago when they were younger, so I came home from teaching one day. I said I bought a smart car. They ran out to the driveway to look for it. It wasn't there, of course. It was on my layout. And when I showed it to them, oh, they wouldn't talk to me for a couple of weeks after that. Oh, here we have a rail diesel car coming into town. Yeah, these supplanted the passenger trains over time. Coming into a stop at the station. That milk car at Marshall Creamery needs to be lifted to go out on the next passenger train. However, it shares the spur siding with the team track that holds two cars at the moment, and the freight shed holds the buggy, the B&M caboose. So let's fire up our switch engine, and let's come in onto that cut of cars in order to lift the milk car. Normally I would stop to couple onto all these cars, but because I'm filming, I just have to bang them in together, if you will. And there we are, we've got the milk car, and it's time to pull out with our cut, and that car is destined for the next inbound passenger train. The whole cut rides along the team track, and the locomotive will bring that milk car clear of the turnout at the siding. Right there, that's good. We note that the crew has replaced those cars on the siding, and it awaits the passenger train, having isolated the milk car. And we spot the passenger train on the roll right now coming into town. And the passenger train is going to head over to the station for its station stop. It'll bring the passengers into the station first. And once the station stop has taken place and the passengers have disembarked, the train is going to back up past the turnout into the south siding. Having done so, we've uncoupled the head end, and the train goes back out to the station, and it stopped. At this point, the local town crew will take that milk car, and it's going to head out onto the main line, and it's going to deposit that car onto the train. And here we are. Then we'll back the crew onto its siding, at which point I'll get the turnout and the passenger train will back up onto its train. And here we see the passenger train now backing up onto its cut of cars. With clearance to leave, the train gets underway. This train will be in Boston in an hour or so's time. Has 2 milk cars now on the head end and 3 passenger cars. Our town crew has some switching to conduct at Scodris Grocers. In the meanwhile, we have a passenger train coming into town, and these passenger trains are often named trains. There's the East Wind, that's a summer-only train. There's the Kennebec, there's the Pine Tree Limited. Sometimes you'll see Boston and Maine Power on the head end, and sometimes you'll see Maine Central Power on the head end of the same trains on different days. Our train comes to a stop at the station. It has to clear the road crossing there in North Dover, and Scodris Grocers has been handled by the local crew as well. Bravo. As the passenger train departs town, I'll get the turnout for our local crew, and they will bring their car down to the south siding. There they come now. And the switch is clear. And I'm able to bring them down. And I get the south siding switch there. And voila, the job is done. With my layout complete now, and I've now retired from teaching, I have plenty of time to build dioramas. I've made 25 or 30 so far, a lot of craftsman kits, but also I've scratch built a number of kits. There's a diorama in the distance still under construction. So as you can see, I have a lot of modeling still to do, even though I don't need to build any more model railroad. Sometimes the kit manufacturers themselves ask me to build a kit for them, and then I put it on my website. And Jerry at Mount Albert Scale Lumber asked me to do so a couple of times. And since that time, he's retired, and Tim Morris of Fast Tracks has bought out the business. It's running very well. And this was the Mount Albert lumber mill in HO scale, which was a joy to recreate. This is my most recent project. I'm scratch building a machine shop for my friend Doug Matheson, and those are Sierra West scale model machines in O scale. Each one took multiple hours to build. The whole shop itself, the interior with all the workings, has been built from scratch. With the water tower outside to power the machine shop, there's the machine engine to the left and all the machines and the workers in the background. Oh, it's a thing of beauty. I've been really enjoying this build. Visitors to my layout enter the crew lounge, where you see 3 large-scale locomotives that I operate every Saturday at a big outdoor garden railroad here in Ottawa. I also have some lanterns from the Boston and Maine, and I have box cars in the different scales to educate young children about the different scales that there are in model railroading. There are many more than just that 4. Here's another Seacoast diorama I built many years ago, and it's meant for a shelf layout someday. And there's the first model I ever built when I got into model railroading down there on that diorama. And a friend gave me that beautiful crew that she made of the train at midnight. Very special indeed. I'd like to thank you for paying a visit to my layout, and you're always welcome back. Why don't you board this passenger train and see the whole railroad from top to bottom? It's such a joy to operate, and it's a joy to be in the train room. It's always May 27th, 1958. When I enter this room, that's the day I was born. So I always have a smile on my face. I'm always in a great mood. Model railroading is fun. Nothing else can be said any truer. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to visit my model railroad virtually. When the pandemic is over, you're more than welcome to pay me a visit at your leisure. It's always a joy for me to host visitors to the railroad. Thank you, and best wishes, and stay safe.